As training camp approaches, we'll be reviewing several players' performances during the 2023 season and discussing how they could impact the Eagles in the 2024 season. Today, we'll be looking at Milton Williams. So today we're going to be looking at Milton Williams, a huge fan favorite with almost cult-like following. Listen, Milton Williams is a good player, but I think he might be good in a different way than most people realize. For a guy of his size and stature with his athletic traits, you'd expect that he'd be this guy that could develop into a top-tier pass rusher when it's actually his run defense that is really outstanding. And when you look at some of the underlying metrics, he is one of the better interior run defenders. So let's look at his run stop rate. Out of the top 150 interior defensive linemen last season, his run stop rate, which is his total solo and assisted tackles divided by the number of run plays he faced, he was 17th out of the top 150. His stuff rate, where he got a tackle for a loss or held the run to 0 yards, he was 17th as well. Those are really high metrics for a player, and shows that he's not only consistent and holding his ground and finding the football, but he's also getting into the backfield and creating negative plays for the defense. And listen, he is a little bit of an undersized player in terms of his overall weight, but he plays much bigger than he is, especially when taking on single blocks. He plays with great leverage. He's a very strong player. You can see that in some of his explosive metrics at the combine or when he at his pro day, because it was COVID during that time. And also his bench press number just shows that he is a strong athlete, and it shows on the field. There was an impressive play where he pretty much bench pressed Trent Brown off of him against the Patriots. Trent Brown outweighs him by probably 90 pounds. Not only does he bench press him off of himself, he then makes a tackle. So he's a player that not only is extremely quick and fast off the ball, which helps him knife into the backfield to either chase runs down from behind or just swim right past a slow-footed offensive guard. He's a guy that beats single blocks one-on-one with strength as well. And you know what? I think he's actually really good for these read and react type styles that the Fangio defenses will play. And especially when they're in their 5-down fronts, when he's playing that 4-eye, he's really good at reading the first movement of the offensive lineman and then reacting. It's not so much that, yes, he is very quick off the ball, but just having the ability to process which direction the offensive line is moving and understanding where he needs to go next to make plays is outstanding. Now, I do think he gets moved against double teams. So if the Eagles are playing a team that are going to make it a point to double team that 4-eye or double team Milton and try to run right behind him, he can get into some trouble with that. Now, I think that's something that you can kind of game plan around. You can find you can look at the offense and see how do they like to attack certain fronts and maybe do things to mitigate the amount of times that he's in those positions. But I think he far outweighs his benefits far outweighs his downsides when it comes to the run game. Now, as a pass rusher, I do think he's a little bit below average. He hasn't quite taken that next step to be the pass rusher that we all really think he can become, especially based on who he is as an athlete. His pressure rate last season was 74th out of the top 150. His pass rush win rate was 87th out of the top 150, and his pass rush score was 72nd. Now, if we separate out and look at just his third down stats, where generally, Milton played, I think he was third and the third down snaps among the interior defensive linemen on the Eagles last season. So he was playing a lot of the first and second down snaps where you just don't get as many pressures and wins as you do playing on third down. So if we just look at third down, his pressure rate was 77th out of 100. His pass rush win rate was 82nd out of the top 100. And my pass rush score for him was 76. Those numbers were actually lower than Jordan Davis. So going into next season, listen, Milton's right up there with, he's a very good run defender. But I think, especially when he starts getting into contract talks, you really want to see him take that next step if you're really going to commit to him long term. He has the tools to do it. And going into his fourth year, we should see an increased role for him. But that's what I'm going to be paying attention to when you look at Milton Williams in 2024.
Yeah, absolutely. And listen, if you're ever going to see pass rush productivity, it's probably going to be in the contract year. I I highly doubt that he's back after this year, because if he pops, someone's going to give him the bag, and so that's okay. Um, I am a little concerned if it's like him and Sweat on the same side, and I don't want to jump the gun into the Sweat talk, but he's just so undisciplined in the run fits. And then, as you mentioned, Williams is susceptible to the double team. So I do hope that they kind of have some flexibility in how they move around the interior defensive line, just to mitigate some of those problems. Um, I do think he has potential to grow as a pass rusher, as you mentioned, because he has really good movement skills. I think we'll see some more juice out of him because he's expiring. And I think he'll play more. He was on the field just under 4 out of every 10 snaps last year, I believe. That I think that'll be closer to 5 out of 10, potentially even more next year. So we'll need him, especially with Carter and Davis getting the most snaps they've ever played in their life. We'll desperately need him to come in and give them a refresher at times and still be able to play the pass and the run. So yeah, all in all, I don't think he'll be back. I think he's projected to be a pretty solid player next year, and I hope he surprises me.
Yeah, I think that is actually somewhat of a hot take to say he's not going to be back next year, because if you look around Eagles Twitter, people are wondering why he hasn't been re-signed already. Because like I said, he is a fan favorite. He does have a bit of a cult following, but I think people are just overrating him a little bit, and the fact that they just kind of assume that once he starts playing more snaps, he's just going to be, racking up a ton of sacks. He would have been playing more third down snaps last season if the coaches thought he was a better pass rusher. Fletch was probably their second best interior pass rusher last season, and he was just a little bit above average, just slightly above average when you look at his pressure rates and his numbers. They were really looking for someone to step up next to Jalen Carter, and Milton didn't get a ton of snaps, but he also didn't do much in the snaps that he was given. And so he didn't really do anything to earn that extra playing time. Now he may be thrust into that role more now, just who's really going to take a lot of those snaps from him on third down? I don't think Jordan Davis is going to be taking a ton of those snaps. If you look after him, who's going to be playing behind him? Moro Ojomo, I saw some really good things out of him, but that was in the run game. I don't know how much juice he's going to have in the pass game. I think he's a really good run defender, but do you hand out big contracts to run defenders? And do you hand out big contracts to run defenders when you have a guy like Moro Ojomo, who I think is, listen, he didn't play a ton last season, but when he played, he looked really good against the run. If you have a guy that hasn't shown as a pass rusher, but is a good run defender, I think it's a little easier to find some good run defenders than it is to find good pass rushers. So why would I go and hand out a contract and commit long-term to a guy that hasn't shown it yet? And I think if he does sign an extension, if Milton Williams does sign an extension, I think it'll be probably either training camp or early in the season where the coaches can tell, hey, this guy's coming in different than he has in the past years. He's really worked things out. He's gotten like when I watch Milton as a pass rusher, it's just like his timing is just a little bit off. And it's like you can see the moves that he's trying to implement, which are a little bit Javon Hargrave-ish. Like you could tell like he has some of that influence where he likes to use some stutters to fake one way and counter back inside or back outside. But it's just for whatever reason, he's letting guys get their hands in his chest and it's just throwing off his rush. And if he can figure that out, I mean, I think he can be a dominant. I don't know how dominant, but I think he can be a guy that could earn a contract with the Eagles. But he needs to show that he can be a better pass rusher, or I just don't think it's worth investing that much money, especially if Moro Ojomo can take a step as well and play more snaps and kind of show out in his limited snaps. I think I'd rather just roll the dice with Ojomo going forward on a cheaper contract. Now, as far as him playing more snaps, I think there's a huge opportunity for him to step up on third downs. If you look at all of the interior defensive line snaps that the Eagles had last season on third down, Fletcher Cox played, I think, 38% of those snaps. Jalen Carter played 32% of the snaps. And then Milton played, I think it was 12 or 13% of those snaps on third down. The biggest area for him to get more snaps is going to be on third down as a pass rusher. And he's going to have his opportunity. Now, I think one area that can really help him is if you watched our Jalen Carter episode, I discussed how they use these pick stunts to free up Christian Wilkins. That in turn got Zach Sealer the most unblocked pressures he's ever had in his career, which also led to Sealer going from a career high of 3.5 sacks to 10 sacks last season under Fangio. I think Williams can play that role because he's a guy that's quick enough to look like he's countering inside and then get the guard to bite down on him as he goes to pick that center and free up Jalen Carter coming back around. I think he could really thrive in that role, more so than a guy like Jordan Davis would. I just think he's too slow to influence the a guard to follow him inside to free up Jalen Carter. So I think that is a role that he can really, probably is his best bet to increasing its pass rush productivity. But is that a guy that, again, he's not winning because of his own, he'd be winning because of scheme. And is it worth handing out a contract based on that? I'm not sure. But I'm with you on I don't know if he's back after next season. I think if he is, it's going to be early season contract where the team can tell he's taken that next step.
Yeah, listen, if it was a cheap contract, I'd love to take him. I'm not that optimistic that it will be because I think he might stat hunt a little bit. Listen, I don't know the guy's mental makeup, but he was like, I believe, a third rounder. Is that correct?
Yeah, third rounder. Yeah.
And this is the last year. So in NFL terms, he hasn't made that much money. This is his first chance to get a lot of money. And what makes teams pay a lot of money? It's if you have a lot of productivity. So that may lead him to stat hunt a little bit, which obviously is not ideal. And we'll talk about this more in our long form podcast, just about how all of the defensive line needs to work together to maximize the pass rush. But I 100% agree. I think he'll be in on a fair bit of third downs. And if he's not double teamed, I like him in that role.
Yeah, and I think when you're looking at players when it comes contract time, I think there's 3 type of players. There are open the checkbook, give them what they want type of players. You have the players where we're not bringing him back at any cost. And then you have okay, what's the cost player? And I think Milton's probably going to fall into, all right, we'll bring him back, but what's the cost? It's not someone I'm going out to spend extra money on if he doesn't look like he's going to increase his pass rush productivity going into next season.